Tristan seemed perfectly predictable, an entitled, ruthless alpha on a daily mission to destroy a junior analyst's career. But when this terrifying corporate tyrant suddenly collapsed on the office carpet, the desperate, world-altering secret spilling from his lips shattered every single assumption about the man behind the monster. The air on the 42nd floor of Caldwell and Pierce Investments was always kept at a brisk 68 degrees. But under the heavy wool of my suit, I was constantly sweating. Being an Omega in a high-stakes, alpha-dominated financial firm in downtown Chicago meant living in a perpetual state of hypervigilance. I relied on prescription-strength scent blockers and a meticulously maintained aura of beta-level mediocrity just to survive. My name is Nathaniel Reese, and for 2 years I was a ghost in the risk assessment department until Tristan Caldwell took over. Tristan was the CEO's son. He was a prime alpha, standing 6'3", with a jawline that looked like it could cut glass, and a reputation that was even sharper. From the moment he walked into our open-plan office, his scent, a sharp, intimidating blend of winter pine and ozone, suffocated the room. And from that very first day, he locked his sights on me. I still remember our first interaction. It was a Tuesday morning. I had prepared the quarterly risk projections for the upcoming tech sector portfolio. I placed the heavily researched 60-page dossier on his desk. Tristan didn't even open it. He just stared at me, his dark eyes narrowing, as if trying to dissect me right there on the Persian rug of his corner office. Reese, he had said, his voice, a low, vibrating rumble that made the Omega instincts I fought so hard to suppress flare in blind panic. This formatting is a joke. The margins are inconsistent, and your executive summary reads like a college freshman's term pert. Do it again. But Mr. Caldwell, I had protested softly, the data. I don't care about the data if the presentation looks like garbage. Have it on my desk by 6 a.m. tomorrow, or pack your bags. That was the beginning of my personal hell. For 6 months, Tristan systematically dismantled my professional life. If I brought him black coffee, he suddenly wanted a flat white. If I finished a financial model in 3 days, he demanded to know why it hadn't taken 2. He would call me out in the middle of crowded board meetings. I remember a particularly brutal Tuesday in front of the board of directors, including his father, Arthur Caldwell, and the head of HR, Chloe Jenkins. Nathaniel's projections are fundamentally flawed. Tristan had announced, tossing my laser-bound report onto the mahogany table. He's entirely missed the depreciation of the overseas assets. It's sloppy. It's weak. Frankly, I expect better from a junior analyst. I had felt my cheeks burn with a humiliating flush. The overseas assets weren't depreciating. They were temporarily frozen due to a trade embargo, a fact I had clearly noted on page 14. But you didn't argue with an alpha like Tristan in public. You just lowered your eyes, bared your neck, in a subtle, unconscious show of submission, and took the beating. My co-worker and closest friend at the firm, David Orris, a gentle beta who worked in compliance, would often find me in the break room, aggressively scrubbing my face with cold water. You need to report him to HR, Nate. David urged one afternoon, watching me pop 2 extra suppressant pills. The stress was causing my natural scent, a soft, sweet combination of rain and vanilla, to leak through my chemical barriers. This isn't just a tough boss anymore. This is targeted harassment. He hates you. I can't go to Chloe Jenkins, I whispered, fiercely gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. She answers to his father. If I complain, they'll look closely at my file. They'll mandate a medical screening to prove I can handle the stress of the job. If they find out I'm an Omega on black market suppressants, I didn't have to finish the sentence. Caldwell and Pierce didn't hire Omegas for the trading floor or risk management. It was an unspoken, highly illegal, yet strictly enforced rule. They believed our biology made us too volatile for billion-dollar decisions. If I was outed, I wouldn't just lose my job. I'd be blacklisted in the entire financial district. So I endured. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept on the uncomfortable leather sofa in the filing room. I rewrote reports until my fingers cramped. I let Tristan Caldwell use me as his personal punching bag, convincing myself that he was just a spoiled, arrogant heir, taking his aggression out on the weakest link in the room. But looking back, there were signs. Strange, fleeting moments that didn't align with the narrative of the cruel, sadistic alpha. Like the time I accidentally cut my hand on a paper shredder. It was a shallow cut, but it bled freely. Tristan had walked into the copy room at that exact moment. Instead of his usual sneer, his eyes had blown wide, the pupils dilating until they were almost entirely black. A low, rumbling growl had ripped through his chest, not a sound of anger, but of frantic distress. He had practically shoved me toward the first aid kit, barking at me to wrap it up and go home, his breathing ragged and uneven, or the way he never actually fired me, despite his constant threats. He would rip my work apart, force me to rebuild it from the ground up, and then, inevitably, he would use my newly revised data to close massive deals, earning the firm millions. I ignored these anomalies. I was too tired, too stressed, and too focused on survival to see the truth hiding beneath his hostile exterior. I hated him with a burning, exhausting passion. I hated his perfect suits, his demanding voice, and the way his winter pine scent made my suppressed biology ache in ways I refused to acknowledge. The breaking point arrived in mid-November during the climax of the Vanguard acquisition. Vanguard Logistics was a $2.4 billion company, and Caldwell and Pierce was orchestrating a hostile takeover. The entire floor was running on espresso adrenaline and pure panic. Tristan was leading the charge, and if he was a tyrant before, he became an absolute monster during the acquisition. He practically lived in his office. His tailored suits became slightly rumpled, his ties were loosened, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. His scent, usually so crisp and controlled, grew heavy and suffocating, laced with something dark and metallic. As his lead risk analyst, a title he forced upon me, purely so he could micromanage my every waking second, I bore the brunt of his deterioration. It was a Friday night. The clock on my desktop read 11:34 p.m. The 42nd floor was entirely deserted, save for the cleaning crew on the opposite end of the building and the harsh, fluorescent lights humming above me. I was staring at a spreadsheet that was starting to blur into a sea of meaningless green numbers. My head throbbed, and my scent patches were itching terribly, a sign that they were deteriorating and needed to be changed. "Reese," the bark echoed across the empty floor. I flinched, my fingers freezing on the keyboard. Tristan was standing in the doorway of his office, his silhouette backlit by the city lights pouring through his floor-to-ceiling windows. "In my office now." I grabbed my tablet, taking a deep breath to steady my frayed nerves, and marched into his domain. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air hit me like a physical blow. The scent of pine and ozone was gone, replaced by the suffocating stench of burnt ash and desperate, aggressive alpha pheromones. It was so intense it made my eyes water. "What is this?" Tristan snarled, slamming a printed document onto his desk. He was leaning heavily against the mahogany wood, his knuckles white. I asked for the liability margins on Vanguard's European shipping fleet. This is a summary of their domestic real estate. The shipping fleet data is on page 4, Mr. Caldwell," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I included the real estate summary because it correlates directly to their domestic debt. "I didn't ask for your correlations," he roared, suddenly pushing off the desk. He paced toward me, his movements erratic, almost stumbling. I asked you to do one simple task. Can you not follow basic instructions? Are you entirely incompetent, Nathaniel? The use of my first name shocked me. He always called me Reese. But more than that, I was suddenly blindingly angry. 2 years of humiliation, exhaustion, and fear boiled over in a spectacular loss of control. I am not incompetent, I shouted back, shocking both of us. My voice rang off the glass walls. I have given you everything for the last 6 months. I have fixed your models. I have covered your blind spots. And I have endured your endless petty abuse. The data is on page 4. If you would bother to actually read the work I do, instead of just using it as an excuse to tear me down, you would know that... Tristan froze. He stared at me, his chest heaving. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to strike me. The alpha aggression rolling off him was suffocating. I instinctively braced myself, shutting my eyes and turning my head away. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a ragged, wet gasp. I opened my eyes. Tristan was swaying on his feet. The fierce, terrifying alpha mask had completely vanished. His face was chalk white, glistening with cold sweat. He raised a trembling hand to his chest, clutching at the fabric of his expensive dress shirt, as if he were trying to tear it off. Tristan, I whispered, dropping the professionalism. Nate, he choked out. It was a sound of pure agony. His knees buckled. He didn't just fall. He collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. I didn't think. My body moved entirely on instinct. I lunged forward, catching him just before his head cracked against the edge of a heavy glass coffee table. The impact of his weight drove me to my knees on the carpet. He was incredibly heavy, a solid wall of dense alpha muscle. I managed to wrap my arms around his torso, pulling his upper body into my lap to support his head. Tristan, hey, look at me. I patted his cheek, panic clawing at my throat. Are you having a heart attack? I need to call an ambulance. I reached blindly for my phone, but a large, burning, hot hand clamped over my wrist. His grip was weak, but desperate. No. He rasped, his eyes barely open, rolling back in his head. No hospitals. Please. You're collapsing. You need a doctor. Pills. He gasped, his whole body trembling with violent tremors. Bottom drawer. My desk. Locked. I gently lowered his head onto the carpet and scrambled to his desk. The bottom drawer was indeed locked. I didn't have time to look for a key. I grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from his pen cup and jammed it into the gap above the lock, prying it with all my strength. With a loud crack, the wood splintered and the drawer slid open. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom, made of black velvet, was a silver metal lockbox. Thankfully, it was unlatched. I flipped it open, expecting to find heart medication, or perhaps something illicit. Instead, I stared in absolute shock at the contents. Row upon row of heavy-duty military-grade medical vials, syringes, and a dozen boxes of pills with labels I recognized instantly because I had a stash of a much weaker generic version hidden in my own bathroom cabinet. They were suppressants, but not the kind used by Omegas to hide their slick and scent. These were alpha suppressants, specifically designed to counteract a condition I had only read about in obscure medical journals, alpha hyperfrenzy, a genetic neurological disorder where an alpha's body overproduces pheromones and adrenaline to toxic, eventually fatal levels, usually triggered by the presence of an unbonded Omega. I looked from the box of pills to the man seizing on the floor. Tristan Caldwell wasn't a ruthless tyrant trying to destroy me. He was a dying man fighting a losing battle against his own biology, and the scent leaking through my cheap blockers was the trigger pushing him over the edge. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the medical supplies. Inside the lockbox was a preloaded auto-injector, its thick glass barrel filled with a cloudy, luminescent blue serum. The label bore the distinct branding of Dr. Samuel Kensington, a highly private elite neurologist at Northwestern Memorial, who catered exclusively to the city's most powerful alpha families. I didn't hesitate. I ripped the safety cap off the injector with my teeth, pressed the wide plastic base against the thick muscle of Tristan's thigh, and pushed the trigger. The device hissed. Tristan's entire body went rigid, his back arching off the carpet as a strangled, guttural sound ripped from his throat. For 10 terrifying seconds I thought I had killed him. Then slowly the rigid tension melted from his limbs. His head lolled back against my arm, and his breathing, previously a series of shallow, desperate gasps, deepened into a steady rhythm. The suffocating burnt-ash stench of his pheromones began to recede, slowly replaced by the familiar grounding scent of winter pine. Only this time, it wasn't sharp or aggressive. It was soft, wrapping around me, like a heavy protective blanket. I sat there on the floor of the executive office, holding the most feared alpha in the financial district in my lap, trying to process the catastrophic shift in my reality. "You're an Omega," Tristan rasped. I jumped, looking down. His dark eyes were open, heavily lidded and exhausted, but fixed squarely on my face. The sheer vulnerability in his gaze was so jarringly out of character that it made my chest ache. "And you have alpha hyperfrenzy." I countered, my voice trembling but surprisingly firm. "Which means your body overproduces aggression and territorial hormones. It's a degenerative neurological condition. If you don't keep it suppressed, my heart stops." He finished softly, closing his eyes. "Dr. Kensington gave me 3 years max, unless I isolated myself from high-stress environments. My father, Arthur, paid millions to keep it off the corporate records. If the board knew the heir to the firm was biologically unstable, our stock would plummet overnight." "Why didn't you step down?" I asked, completely bewildered. "Why stay and run hostile takeovers? Why push yourself to the brink of death?" Tristan let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh that devolved into a painful cough. "Because of you, Nathaniel." I froze. "Excuse me." He shifted, wincing in pain, and slowly pushed himself up until his back was resting against the mahogany panels of his desk. He looked up at me, stripped of all his corporate armor and alpha arrogance. "I knew what you were the second you walked onto this floor 2 years ago." Tristan confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hyperfrenzy doesn't just make me aggressive, it makes me hypersensitive to pheromones. Your blockers fooled the board, they fooled HR, but they didn't fool my biology. From the moment I smelled rain and vanilla under those cheap chemicals, my instincts locked onto you. But you hated me." I argued, my mind spinning. "You tortured me. You humiliated me in front of the entire division. You constantly threatened to fire me. I was trying to make you quit," he said, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "Nate, you are my trigger. The frenzy. It's a mutated mating response. My body recognized you as my true mate, but because you were constantly hiding your scent, constantly suppressed, my instincts went completely insane, trying to claim you. Being near you was literally tearing my nervous system apart. I needed you to leave the firm for my own survival and for your safety. So you bullied me," I scoffed, a spark of indignation flaring to life. "That was your master plan, to be a tyrant. I couldn't bring myself to fire you," Tristan admitted, dropping his head into his hands. "Every time I wrote up your termination papers, my alpha side violently rebelled. The thought of casting you out, of losing sight of you, made me physically sick. So I pushed you. I criticized your work. I gave you impossible deadlines. I prayed you would decide I was a monster and walk out the door on your own terms. But you never did. You just dug your heels in and worked harder." You were so incredibly stubborn, so brilliant, and so damn resilient. The revelation hit me like a freight train. The rewritten reports, the impossible hours, the brutal critiques, it wasn't sadism. It was a desperate, twisted attempt at self-preservation by a man fighting his own DNA. The cut on my hand, I murmured, remembering the day in the copy room. You didn't growl because you were angry. You were panicked because I was bleeding. I almost tore the copy machine to pieces, he whispered, looking away in shame. My suppressant stopped working 3 weeks ago. The Vanguard acquisition stress combined with you working late every night. I knew I was going to crash. I didn't want you to see me like this. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. I am so deeply sorry. For 2 years I had viewed myself as the victim of a cruel, entitled boss. But sitting here on the carpet, looking at the broken, exhausted man before me, the narrative fractured. Tristan wasn't my tormentor. He was a prisoner of his own biology, silently enduring agonizing pain every single day, just to keep me in his orbit, even as it killed him. And the most terrifying part. As his heavy, unguarded winter pine scent washed over me, the Omega instincts I had violently repressed for my entire adult life surged to the surface, recognizing the truth his body had known for years. He was my mate. The dynamic between us shifted in the span of a single heartbeat. Tristan tried to stand his arms shaking under his weight, attempting to reclaim some semblance of his alpha dignity. His legs gave out immediately. Before he could hit the floor, I caught him wrapping my arms firmly around his waist and hoisting him up. "Stop being an idiot," I commanded. My tone was entirely different, now authoritative, steady, and devoid of the submissive hesitation I had worn like a shield for 2 years. Tristan blinked down at me, clearly shocked by the sudden steel in my voice. "Nate, shut up and lean on me." I interrupted, practically dragging him toward the leather sofa on the far side of the office. "You're done running this firm, and you're done running from me." I lowered him onto the sofa, grabbed his discarded suit jacket from his desk chair, and draped it over his shivering shoulders. Then I walked over to the heavy oak doors of his office and locked them. When I turned back, Tristan was watching me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I walked over, knelt between his knees, and looked him dead in the eye. There is a permanent cure for hyperfrenzy, triggered by a true mate, I said softly, reaching up to gently cup his jaw. His skin was burning hot against my cool palms. "Dr. Kensington must have told you. The chemical imbalance stabilizes if the bond is completed." Tristan swallowed hard, leaning into my touch, despite himself. "I won't force you into a bond, Nathaniel. Not after how I've treated you. Not to save my own life. I'll resign tomorrow. I'll leave Chicago. You'll never have to see me again." "Did you miss the part where I said, 'Stop being an idiot'?" I asked, a small smile breaking through my stern facade. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his. "You don't get to make the decisions anymore, Mr. Pierce. I am your lead risk analyst. I've assessed the situation, run the projections, and calculated the odds. And my conclusion is that I'm not letting you go anywhere." I didn't wait for his permission. I reached behind my own neck and ruthlessly tore off the chemical scent-blocking patches. Instantly, the sweet, heavy scent of rain and vanilla flooded the enclosed office. The effect on Tristan was instantaneous. A deep, primal rumble vibrated through his chest. His eyes flashed from exhausted brown to a brilliant, glowing gold. The tension in his muscles shifted from pain to raw, focused power. But he didn't move. He held himself completely still, letting me set the pace, surrendering his ultimate authority to me. "Claim me, Tristan," I whispered against his lips. When he finally kissed me, it wasn't with the aggression of a tyrant, but with the desperate, starving devotion of a man who had finally been given permission to breathe. The bond snapped into place like a puzzle piece, finally finding its home, a rush of warmth and absolute certainty that cascaded through both of our nervous systems. The chaotic, toxic storm of his hyperfrenzy evaporated, replaced by a profound, unbreakable serenity. The real drama, however, began the following Monday morning. The board of directors, including Arthur Pierce and the notoriously prejudiced head of HR, Chloe Jenkins, were gathered in the main conference room to finalize the Vanguard acquisition. They were expecting Tristan to walk in and deliver his usual ruthless presentation. Instead, the double-glass door swung open, and I walked in first, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit, carrying the finalized dossiers. Tristan walked in, half a step behind me, his posture relaxed, his eyes clear, and his scent radiating a calm, protective alpha energy that instantly dominated the room. Chloe Jenkins stood up, her face flushing with outrage. "Mr. Rees, what is the meaning of this junior analysts do not have clearance for executive board meetings? And what is that? Scent?" She pinched her nose in disgust as my natural omega pheromones, now freely intermingling with Tristan's, filled the room. "Nathaniel is not a junior analyst anymore, Chloe," Tristan stated, stepping forward and placing a firm, possessive hand on the small of my back. "He is the new co-director of acquisitions." Arthur Pierce slammed his hands on the mahogany table. "Tristan, have you lost your mind? He is an Omega. You know company policy. Company policy is illegal, discriminatory, and officially terminated as of this morning." I interrupted smoothly, tossing a thick, heavily researched legal dossier directly in front of Arthur. "I've spent the weekend auditing the firm's hiring practices, backed by a team of external employment lawyers. If you attempt to enforce that archaic rule, or if you attempt to dismiss me, the ensuing lawsuit will drag Caldwell and Pierce through the mud and shatter our stock prices before the Vanguard deal even clears escrow." The room descended into stunned silence. Arthur looked at the legal documents, his face turning an alarming shade of purple, then looked at his son. "You're letting an Omega dictate terms to us," Arthur hissed. "I'm letting the most brilliant risk analyst in Chicago save this firm from its own outdated hubris." Tristan replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that demanded absolute silence. He looked down at me, a genuine, blindingly soft smile touching his lips. "And I highly suggest you listen to him, Father. He's incredibly stubborn. I had walked into this building 2 years ago as a ghost, terrified of my own biology, hiding from a boss I thought wanted to destroy me. But as I stood at the head of the boardroom table, a true mate to the most powerful alpha in the city, watching the corrupt old guard crumble before my carefully calculated data, I realized the ultimate truth. Tristan didn't break me. He just applied enough pressure until I realized I was made of diamonds. Did this intense Omegaverse drama keep you on the edge of your seat? The dynamic between Tristan and Nathaniel proves the harshest exteriors hide the deepest devotions. If you loved this story of power, dynamics, hidden identities, and fated mates, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with fellow audiobook lovers and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling high-stakes romance stories every single week. Drop a comment down below with your absolute favorite moment.